You know, for a long time, every time I've needed to build something big or break down some sheets of plywood, I go upstairs and get these old cheesy plastic sawhorses. I put some wood across it, and then I put my plywood on top of that. And it's been functional, but it hasn't exactly been perfect. And I'll tell you why. If I try to use 2x4s across the sawhorses for support, they're never straight. Never very level. If I use dimensional lumber, then the plywood is so heavy it sags in the middle. I hate these sawhorses because they're really too low. I'm kind of tall and it's too far down to work on. So I decided I was going to make something specifically for breaking down plywood in my shop, and I wanted it to be able to do double duty for other functions. Perhaps for assembling a large project, or even for getting stuff up off the floor when I'm doing finishing. So came up with a little simple idea. You can build this in a day or less in your shop. Probably do it with one sheet of plywood or maybe one sheet and a little extra. And pretty straightforward, but I think you'll like it. So the first thing that I did was I took a full 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood and used the circular saw. In this case I used the Festool with the guide rail, and I cut it into 16-inch wide strips just to make it lighter and easier to handle. Then on the table saw I ripped out 6 strips that are exactly 4 3/8 inches wide, and 3 strips that are 4 7/8 inches wide, or exactly a 1/2 inch wider. Now I'm going to cut these to length. I ripped them out of a full sheet of plywood, so I'm going to cut them to length. I decided on 7 feet, 84 inches as my finished length for this project, and there was no real magic behind that dimension. 7 feet's plenty. Even an 8-foot long sheet of plywood is only going to hang off 6 inches on either end, so it's going to be fine. Now what I want to do is I want to take the 6 narrow pieces and cut a dado dead center the entire length. And I want each dado to be exactly 1/4 inch deep. So first thing that I wanted to do was to set up the router table and make a test. Okay, so I measured this and got it as close as I could to center, but now I want to check it. Now I want to do one other thing before I make my first test cut, and that's that I want to draw a little arrow here and say this is the side that's facing the fence, just so I can remember. Now I don't really need to go in all the way on this cut, because the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the depth, and then I'm going to measure the distance from the 2 edges to make sure it's right. If this depth is not correct, I'll adjust the height of the router bit a little bit, and if this is not centered visually by measuring, I'll adjust the fence a little bit. Okay, so after making those adjustments, I've got the depth just right. Now I'm going to take this test piece and I'm going to do something here to assure that my dado is dead center in the middle. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the center of this test piece, and I'm going to run a groove halfway across. Then I'm going to flip the board over, and I'm going to start from the other end. And if those 2 grooves are lined up with no discernible ridge, then we're dead center in the middle. If one had been off, there would be a little ridge here where I came in from both ends. So we're dead center in the middle. We've got exactly 1/4 inch. So I've set up some fingers here to hold the board up against, and I'm going to use push blocks to hold my boards down flat to make sure I get the same depth of cut the entire length. I've also set up some roller stands behind me and on the other side just to catch the board as it sags off of the router table. this piece of plywood, and all I got to do is 5 more times. Okay, so now all the grooves are cut, and the fit is really good. Yep, it's really nice, perfect fit. But I always do this, and that's just to take a piece of sandpaper. This one happens to be 80 grit sandpaper, and all I do is I just chamfer the edges of the dados just a little bit, real lightly, the length of it. And I've always done that because it helps in the assembly process. Makes things go together a little smoother. If for some reason you were mocking up an assembly and had to take it apart, it prevents any splintering. So I'm going to just give a quick sanding to these 6 pieces, and then we'll move to the next step. Okay, so the pieces are cut, grooves are cut, everything's been lightly sanded, and now it's just a matter of gluing up these I-beams. And I'm going to pour the glue on pretty heavy and just let it kind of land where it lands. I'll spread it around just a little bit. Just going to line up this end down here. And start knocking it home. And put some glue in the top piece. Okay, so now all we want to do is take our little I-beam construction here and clamp it up nice and tight. Okay, I want this to be really flat, so after I got it clamped up, I stood it up in the clamps. And this is a reference straight edge from Lee Valley. It's Veritas, and it's supposed to be accurate within, like, I don't know, a couple of thousandths. I use it all the time for checking for flatness. And so I'm just going to take this thing and slide it along here and see if there's any obvious out of flat conditions. And it looks to be pretty awesome. So I'll let that sit for a little while and we'll do the other 2, and then I'll show you the neat part of the project. Well, yesterday we ripped up some 3/4 inch plywood into 6 strips that are 4 3/8 inches wide and 3 strips that are 4 7/8 inches wide. And then we took the smaller strips, the 6 strips, and cut a dado dead center in the middle, 1/4 inch deep, the full length to fit this plywood. Then last night I glued these up. I had to do them one at a time because I've just got so many clamps. But I didn't want to use any mechanical fasteners of any kind just in case a saw ever runs through this. I don't want to damage a blade. And they'll be plenty strong with just glue. These are really nice, really sturdy, and gosh, I could take these right now and set them on top of these sawhorses, and it would provide a really sturdy and relatively flat base for any kind of work I wanted to do. But I think we're going to be able to do one better. That's by making something else to go with this. And I've made a little drawing so I can show you what we're going to do. The best part is I'm going to use up a whole lot of scrap plywood, and I just feel so noble when I use up scrap. Let's go take a look. What we're going to do is we're going to build boxes. We're going to use plywood scrap. I'm going to rip all the plywood to 2 3/4 inches wide. The box dimensions will be 32 inches overall this direction, 24 inches this direction overall, and 16 inches this direction overall. Now, if the box was sitting on the floor oriented as it is now, you can see that it's 24 inches high. When I place those I-beams on top, which are almost 6 inches high, that'll give me a 30-inch work surface. But if I was to lay this box over on its side to where it's 16 inches high, then add 6 inches to that, and I've got a 22-inch high work surface. Or, if I wanted to turn it up on its end and stand it up, I would have 32 inches plus 6, which is a 38-inch work surface. So I've got 22, 30, and 38-inch high work surfaces with the I-beams by using one box, just turned different directions. Now, of course, I got to make 2 of these, and the construction is going to be really simple. This will be one frame, of course repeated on the other side. This will be a frame, repeated on this end. And this will be a frame that sits down just inside these other 2 frames and will form a 3-dimensional cube out of that. Okay, I've been sawing up storm over there. I've got all these ripped size and cut to length. So now all we got to do is just assemble a whole bunch of little square frame pieces. Okay, I've got a couple of scraps from setting up the table saw to rip the pieces to 2 3/4 inches wide. And so I just want to test this with the pocket hole system. I've got 1 1/4 long coarse thread screws, and I think that's the coarse thread screws is really good for the plywood as opposed to the fine thread screws. But I just want to make sure, since this 3/4 inch plywood is never quite 3/4 inches, I want to make sure the 1 1/4 screw is the right size screw. Alright. Okay, now I would normally clamp this down to the workbench, but since I'm just testing to make sure the screws aren't too long, we'll just go from here. Okay, and there we go. The screw heads, or the screw tips, are not poking through, so that's good. And that's a really strong joint. So by the time I get some glue on there, screw these together and let them sit for a little while, I'm going to have a nice tight joint on all these things. Okay, I have one of the cubes mocked up. Got these 2 panels. Got these 2 panels set just to the inside of this. Got it clamped together temporarily. The dimension I wanted to check was this dimension, and I guessed that it was going to be 30 9/16, and that is exactly what it is 30 9/16. And the reason for that is because that's the only panel that the thickness of the plywood controlled one of the dimensions. On all these others, I was able to control the dimension by how long I cut the pieces between the plywood, but this top dimension is dependent on the thickness of the plywood up here on either end. And since this 3/4 inch plywood is not quite 3/4 of an inch, it actually works out. It should have been 30 1/2, of course, if it had been 3/4 inch plywood, but I need to make these 30 9/16 so it'll fit in there nice and tight. So I'm just going to cut those pieces down to 30 and 9/16 because I had cut them 32 just to get them cut. So I'll just trim those off, and I'm going to build up those other 4 panels to go in here, and then we'll put these boxes together. Okay, so all of the little rectangular pieces are built, and now it's just a matter of gluing up the cubes. And what I'm going to do to forego any clamping is I'm going to glue them up, and I'm going to use 18 gauge brad nails, 1 3/16 inch long, and tack them together. That way I won't have to clamp them. The units will be somewhat self-squaring, so I don't have to worry about that as long as I get the glue up done before the glue sets. And so we'll get to rolling along here. And there we go. All done. That's one cube. I'm going to do the other one. Let it dry for a little bit, and we can put this right into use. So here we go. This is pretty sturdy. 30-inch work height with this configuration. 23.5 inches off the floor in this configuration. I'm up here 38 inches off the ground up here. Setting these up is quite easy. When it's time to stow this away, just flip these I-beams up, nest them together, stow these away, and pick up your little crates and move them out of the way. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing this little project, and hope you'll consider making these for your shop. It'll be a worthwhile investment of one day and one sheet of plywood. Look forward to seeing you soon again in the Down to Earth Woodworking shop. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.